I'm Neil McCormick, and you're watching Needle Time, where my guest is a wizard of prog rock, a man who's going to answer every question with the word yes. Rick Wakeman, very pleased to have you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Neil. Thanks.
Let's start by defending the indefensible. Prog rock. What is so great about progressive rock?
Well, there's been lots of things written about prog rock. I remember being asked in an interview in the late 70s it was, and they said prog rock's got totally overblown, over the top, showing off, completely flamboyant, and just gone too far. What do you say? And I said, well, you're right, I agree with you. And they said, well, this interview's got to be half an hour, can you sort of like try and defend it? And I said, well, I can't at this stage. I said, but I will defend the early days, because really how it started was very much musicians who, in the nicest sense, were sort of not fed up with just playing three-chord tricks and playing all the standard songs and the blues. We were all in blues bands and things and absolutely loved it. But, you know, some of us, if you had a little bit more musical training or had some more ideas, you know, wanted to take it further. But there were sort of rules that were set and been set by the record companies, especially with singles and the format of how singles were done. In fact, the format of how songs were done. You know, intro, verse, chorus, solo, you know, out, fade if you can't find an ending, and be finished in 3 minutes. I did loads and loads of sessions in the 60s and 70s, and there were so many. They were just all like this. And there were quite a few of us who thought, oh, we want to do other things. Why do we have to stick by these rules? And I suppose to some extent it was the style which was lovingly called in the 60s underground music, which is where you went, no, I'm not doing what everybody else wants us to do. And I suppose there were bands like Velvet Underground, there were Vanilla Fudge and a few others that went, no, actually, we're actually going to do what we want to do. And I suppose that was the start of the split between singles and albums, when albums were that was one side of the music industry and singles were the other. And there's quite a few of us in different bands started doing what we wanted to do. Record companies didn't understand what we were doing, and it was fantastic, so they left us alone. You know, you better do what you want. We don't understand it. And then the interesting thing started, which was when albums started to outsell singles, and that's when record companies started to sort of their eyebrows sort of went up and hold on a minute, we've got something here. A, we make more money on selling albums, and also they're selling, you know, twice as much as singles are selling. But what it enabled it to do was musicians then became more, shall we say, they became more able to do exactly what they wanted, because if you look on the commercial side of things, if you were selling a shed load of records, that brought in the money, and the record companies aren't then going to tell you, no, we don't want you to do that. They'll let you carry on doing it. And all we were actually doing was just breaking the rules. We were just, we knew what the rules were about how to write something, how to do it. And we wanted to do something different. If you wanted to have a change of tempo in a song, why not? If you wanted to have loads of different ridiculous key changes, why not? If you wanted to have lyrics that actually weren't a total love song, whatever, do it. Do whatever you want to do. If you want to do a concept, do a concept. Probably peaked around 1976, something like that, 76, 77. And after that, it got totally out of hand. It got totally overblown, and it needed something to happen, and that, of course, was the incoming of punk, which was probably the best thing that could have happened, because it actually went, right, you've gone as far as you can go with that, and that's it. And I think that shows today when people look back on prog, it tends to be that era, the early era of the 70s that they come to. But all it is breaking the rules. And the thing where I will really defend it is that if you go back and listen to 60s pop records, they were all formatted in absolutely every single way you can think of it, in how they were done, length, and very few had anything different in the 60s. If you listen to any radio station now and you listen to singles that are being released today and coming out, you won't find anyone that actually sticks to any of the old formatted rules of how to write. So I think there's an element of prog that sneaked into all young writers and all young performers, that there are no rules. Do what's in your heart and your head musically. So to that extent, I'm really proud of what prog did, because it actually gave the opportunity for musicians today to be their own people.
Okay, well, that's defence. It's a good defence, and we'll come back to prog.
Okay.
Let's go back a little further to start. So why was it music for you? What kicked off your
Oh, crikey. I mean, I've never done anything else. I mean, my headmaster at school on my last report said, Wakeman will either end up on the stage in Downing Street or Wormwood Scrubs. And he was probably right in some respects, well, except for the second one. But when I was very young, I was born in 1949. We lived in a tiny little 2-up-2-down in Northolt in West London. And my parents, before the war and just after the war, had a concert party, which was like a little variety performance, people that went round. It was my mother, who sang, my father, who was a great piano player, stride piano player, like the old style of Charlie Coons. Uncle Stan, who did George Formby impersonations, Uncle Laurie, who was sort of the comedian, and then there was Aunt Esther and Aunt Oliver who also sang. And they were called the WAKEMAN, and they went round and they did variety shows and things, in everything from village halls to occasionally on the bottom of the bill of a big variety show. And come the early 50s, when it all sort of died down, they used to relive those days in our little 2-up-2-down. Somehow they all squeezed into the tiny little front room, round the piano. And Sunday night, after my dad had listened to Sing Something Simple, which was a sort of a regular occurrence, they would all go in the front room and redo their shows. I was only young. I was, 4, something like 3 or 4. And I just loved it, because we didn't have a television. Nobody had a telly in 1954, except for those who watched the coronation. And I used to come down the stairs, used to climb out the stairs, come down the bottom step and sit there and listen. And I just thought it was magical, and I just wanted to join in. So when I went off to piano lessons at age 5, my father said as soon as I'd learnt my first piece, I could actually go in and play. And the first piece I learnt was Buy a Broom, from a music book called Dillaquile Off We Go, which is still the best book for any kid to start learning to play the piano. I only got 9 notes, and I went in and played it just before going to bed, aged 5. And they all clapped and played it again. I played it about 12 times before I got sent back off to bed. And that was it, really. And my father was fantastic, because he said, if you keep your classical training and do all your grades and all the things, and he said, that will give you the technique to do whatever you want. He said, but that won't give you the technique of feeling different kinds of music. He said, the only way you can do that is to go out and play with as many different things as you can. So from right at a young age, I was playing with dance bands. I played in blues bands, jazz bands, trad jazz bands, folk bands.
You know, I sometimes wonder, you presumably studied classical music,
yeah,
and you've played jazz. Now, do these things not, because they've got such complexity and elegance and beauty and huge, they're huge cathedrals of music compared, do they not put you off pop music?
No, not at all. I love pop music. I mean, I was in the 50s, I was a huge Lonnie Donegan fan, and he became a great friend towards the end of his life, which was fantastic. I love skiffle. I thought skiffle was absolutely fantastic. I loved American soul, the 60s soul, the Stax, all those eras, because it was totally different to all forms of classical music and a lot of the bombastic stuff that was around, because it had a feeling, and I loved any music that had a feeling. And I suppose the one thing that I never understood in those early days was why everything was in a compartment in its own little thing. There was modern jazz, there was trad jazz, there was folk music, there was country and western, there was soul, there was rock, there was pop music, and somewhere over there were orchestras and the classical. And I couldn't understand why you couldn't take a bit of that, and get them to play that, because it seems so logical that would work really well with that. And that was always my dream. I was convinced that if certain composers, I don't know, like Wagner or whatever, were alive, and there was and they'd got the opportunity to use electronic instruments and electric guitars, they'd throw them in the orchestra. They wouldn't have them separate. They would put these instruments in the orchestra. And so I always wrote everything that I did when I wrote with orchestras as the band being part of the orchestra, not as a separate thing. And I was just convinced that this would work.
I'm Neil McCormick, and you're watching Needle Time with my guest, Rick Wakeman. So, Rick, you've done some amazing sessions. Quite aside from all your own work that we're going to talk, before you got into your own work, you were playing lots of sessions, as you mentioned. And a lot of them, as you say, were generic, but not all, because you play on Space Oddity, I believe.
That's true, yeah. I mean, I had a strange thing that happened, which was a friend of mine called Chaz Cronk, who's now bass player with the Straws, came into a music shop in South Ealing called Musical Bargain Centre, where I was skiving off from school. And he'd heard that there was a session for a guy called Jimmy Thomas, and Jimmy Thomas was the male vocalist of the Argentina Turner Band. I mean, it's always a misconception that Ike used to sing. He didn't. Jimmy used to sing, and Jimmy had come over to do a solo album with Denny Cordell in London. And for whatever reason, his band had been detained at Heathrow Airport for bringing in sherbet dabs or something that they shouldn't have done. So there was hastily a band being put together for a session at Olympic Studios. And Dave Sims, who owned the shop, said, "You need an organist." So yeah, we need an organist. And he said, "Rick will do it." And I went, "What?" He said, yeah. And Chad said, "Oh, look, great, I haven't got time to muck around. Do you do brass arrangements?" And before I could open my Dave said, "Yeah, he does brass arrangements." He said, "Great, here's a tape." And he gave me a tape, quarter-inch tape. He said, "If you can knock out the brass arrangements, can you book the players and everything as well? See at Olympic Studios Friday week or so." And he went, and I thought, I haven't got a bloody clue. I mean, I'd done quite a lot of BBC sessions for the, actually a pun on it, sort of a play on the name of this show, which was because there had to be a lot of non-needle time playing on BBC in the early days. So I used to do loads of them. So, I wasn't, unused to a studio, although I'd never been to anything as big as Olympic Studios in Barnes. So my next problem was I hadn't got a tape recorder. So I borrowed 50 quid off my dad and bought a Grundig tape recorder, put the tape on, and it was a huge cock up because the tape ran at 15 and this tape recorder I'd bought only ran at 7.5 and 3 3/4. So I was buggered, so I ended up borrowing a tape recorder that ran at 15. Played it, I wrote the parts out, and I didn't know where to book players from. So I got a very good friend of mine, because I was also playing at the top-ranked ballroom in Reading, and there's a mate of mine who was there, and he booked them for me, the guys. So I went along to the recording session, and I went in there, and met Jimmy Thomas, absolutely lovely guy. There was Denny Cordell, and there was also in the studio Keith Grant, the very famous engineer, who I became great friends with, Tony Visconti, and Gus Dudgeon. Right. And they were all in the control. So I arrived, and I was the, in a strange way, the token white guy in the band, because they were all really good black soul players and things who they picked up for the session. I didn't know any of them. They were great. We just chatted away and talked about various things, and then it came to the recording, and Jimmy's guys, one guy just roughly played through the song, which I can remember to this day. It was called The Running Kind. And I went, okay, fine. So I sat down at the Hammond that was in there, and we played. And they are all playing, basically, it was like Booker T and the MGs with Handel on the on the organ, because it's the only way I really knew how to play that kind of stuff. So it was really quite classical what I was doing, and we finished, and one of the guys said, "Well, how did you learn to play like that?" And I said, my teacher in the college and things. And then we finished it, and Denny Cordell, he said, "Come in the control, I want to speak to you." So I went in, and he said, "Where did you learn to play like that?" I said, "Look, I'm pretty certain that what you really want is like Booker T type stuff and things like that, and that's not really, I'm afraid I don't know." He said, No. He said, "Don't do that." He said, "That's what everybody does." He said, "You do what you do." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Come and see me tomorrow morning." He said, at 68 Oxford Street, Dumbarton House, which was Regal Zonophone. He said, "Come and see me at 10 o'clock. And I remember blowing it, because I said, "I've got a French exam in the morning." He said, "You still at school?" I said, "Yeah, I'm just about to go to college." He said, "Well," he said, "let's see what's more important to you, music or the French exam." So I was in his office at 10 in the morning, And then and Tony Visconti gave me some sessions to do with T-Rex and Mark Bolan, which I did. And at one of the sessions that I did for Gus Dudgeon, because he was also doing Elton as well at the same time, a very big fixer called David Katz was there. And David Katz came over to me after the session. He said, "Your reading's really good." I said, well, it's okay. I did all my bit at the college and things like that. And he said, "Would you like some sessions? Can I sign you up?" And I said, "Yeah." So I signed up specifically to David Katz, who was probably the biggest fixer at the time. And then it went absolutely nuts. I was doing a minimum of 2 sessions a day, sometimes 3. And this went on for, a good 2 or 3 years. And you never knew what you were getting. You would arrive and it could be anything from a pop thing to a major artist to a film. You were just throwing the music. But it wasn't my choice, obviously the music what you played. Although you did, certain sessions you were given a free hand. Morning Is Broken with Cat Stevens, I had a complete free hand because it was a very short, it was only 3 verses really, and so only lasted 40 seconds. So it was desperate to make it longer. So
you filled it out with all that,
with all the piano
fancy piano stuff.
I did Space Oddity with David because Tony Visconti didn't know anybody else who knew how to keep the mellotron in tune, so I went on and did that. I became really good friends with David. He said, "Do you want to do some more?" And I said, "I'd love to." So I did the album. I did tracks like Wild Eyed Boy from Free Cloud, which was great stuff, and the Song of a Free Festival. And then he invited me round his house. This was unusual, because normally with sessions, you arrive, they throw the music, you play, you go home. But David invited me round to his house. He was living in Beckenham at the time. And I feel quite honoured because I was the first person he ever played the songs from Hunky Dory to. And he took out this battered old 12-string, lovely house, and he had like a minstrel's gallery with a grand piano. And he said, "I'm going to play you some songs and I want you to make notes and then, imagine them as piano pieces." I said, "Okay." And he played me a wonderful song, one after the other. And I said, "These are amazing." And I remember him playing Life on Mars to me, and I went, "This is just..." I said, "You really have, this is classic stuff." And he said, I want to come to this album not from a guitar angle, I want to come from a piano angle. He said, "So I really want you to think of these as piano pieces." He said, "And I'll get everybody to work around you," which is pretty much what happened. I mean, for years people sort of said, "God, you must have worked so hard to do those arrangements." I think it's like on Life on Mars, all the complexity of things that were going around you. I go, "Yeah, absolutely." It took ages and ages to do. The truth of the matter is everybody had to work around me. But some sessions, you had a free hand, and some you didn't. Did quite a few sort of the pop hits, but it was the luck of the draw.
You did work with Elton, right?
Yeah.
Well, why? I mean, he's a piano player.
I didn't play the piano on any of Elton's stuff. I used to. Elton's a great piano player, great songwriter. And
you're telling me he hasn't been faking it all these years?
No, he has not been faking it. He's a really good player. But what he doesn't like is playing the organ. He never liked playing the organ. We mostly used to see each other at football matches, Brentford v Watford or Watford v Brentford. We had the conversation where he actually said to me, "I want to write a long epic." And I said, "I want to write a song, proper song." I said, "But the problem is I start writing a song, I go, yeah, this is a real good song. Yeah, this is a song. This is a pop song." And I play it back and it's 9.5 minutes long and I'm only the other end of the intro. And he said, "I have the opposite." He said, "I said, I'm going to write an epic." He said, "And I do, and I think this is fantastic." He said, "And I play it back and it's 3.5 minutes long." So we sort of agreed that we should be actually thankful that we could actually do what we do. I mean, Elton, I just think he's a great songwriter, and he's a great player too. I've got a lot of time and a lot of respect for Elton.
I'm Neil McCormick, and you're watching Needle Time with my guest, Rick Wakeman. As the 70s unfold, you formed what is probably still the definitive progressive rock group, which you've been in and out of in many incarnations.
That's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there a kind of discussion of what Yes was going to be?
Well, Yes was formed before I initially joined them. They formed in 1968 and initially did Beatles covers. They were a vocal band, really, more than anything else. And then there was a few changes. Steve Howe came in on guitar, and it was an interesting thing what happened. I was with Straubs, and I loved Straubs. Dave Cousin, I think, is a great lyricist and a great songwriter. But we did an album called From a Witchwood, which started to get, for my taste at the time, a bit too poppy. And I thought, this is going down the pop band route now, and I don't really want to do that. I want something more to get my teeth into. And we'd supported Yes, funny enough, in Hull. And after we'd done our set, I sat there and watched Yes, and I loved them because everything was wrong.
Yeah.
At that time, all guitarists used, as many Marshall stacks as they could possibly do. Steve had a little Fender Twin Reverb. There's probably one in here somewhere. A little Fender Twin Reverb. That was all he had. Bill Bruford mic'd his kit up and also had, he tuned them like biscuit tins. It was really unusual and didn't play like a normal rock drummer. Chris Squire, the bass player, instead of using sort of Marshall amps and things like that again, he had Sun amps, which nobody had ever heard of, and the treble turned up full and the bass turned up full and all the middle wound off. I found out later that was because the middle didn't work, right. but it created that really unique sound. All bass players in rock bands that were using Fender basses, Fender jazz basses. Now he had a Rickenbacker, which were completely, sort of non-trendy. And then on came the singer. Most singers at that time were 6 foot, long black greasy hair and shouted a lot. And on came this diminutive little guy in about 5 foot nothing, who had an alto voice. The only thing that was normal about the rock was I suppose was Tony Kaye, who was the organ player, who played like a rock band would. I just thought it was remarkable. And the songs didn't really adhere to anything that was about at the time. And I really enjoyed them, and that was it, really. And it was a couple of months, 2 or 3 months later, I got a phone call from Chris Squire. And it was a weird period of time. I was doing a lot of sessions. It was, 72? And 71, sorry. It was 1971. I was doing loads and loads of sessions. I remember getting in, getting into bed about 2 o'clock in the morning, knackered. I had to be up at 6 to go in for the first session, so I was really tired. And I was going to bed, and the phone rang. And I picked it up, and it was Chris Squire. Now, I'd never spoken to Chris Squire before, and he just went, it's Chris Squire. And he said, do you know what time it is? And I went, yeah, it's bloody 2:30. And he went, yeah. He said, we just got back from America. I went, have you? Great, lovely, I'm thrilled for you. I said, I've got to be up at 6. He went, have you? And I went, oh, God, what do you want, Chris? And he said, well, we want to have a change in the direction of the band. We want to go more down the orchestral route. We read an article in Melody Maker where you said, that keyboards, in their proper usage as they're developing, could well be the orchestral part of any rock band. I said, yeah, I believe that. I said, there's developments going on all the time. He said, would you want to join? And I said, I've got a load of sessions. Can you call me tomorrow sometime when I'm sort of semi-awake? He went, yeah, okay. So that was it, really. And I went and did my sessions during the day. And, of course, it was before the days of mobiles and all that sort of crap. And I got home and I said, you've had a phone call from a guy called Brian Lane, who's the manager of Yes. So I called him up. And he said, can you come in and just have a meeting with me and things and whatever? And I said, yeah, okay. So in between the sessions, I went up and they were in South Street in London, part of the Hemdale group. And under that management, there was also Black Sabbath as well as Yes. So I went in there and talking to Brian, I said, look, Brian, I'm doing all these sessions. I'm up to my neck in it. And I'm not really sure what I want to do. I don't really want to continue with Straubs and the guys that they're moving into. So I might just end up doing sessions and whatever. He said, well, why don't you go along to a rehearsal and see how you feel in rehearsal? I said, yeah, that's a fair comment. I'll do that. So I went along and rehearsed. We rehearsed in Shepherd's Market in Mayfair, basically above a brothel. I couldn't understand why it was summertime, it was August, and I couldn't understand why there was all these women in fur coats standing outside, and why the crew kept disappearing for half an hour at a time. Very naive. And we rehearsed upstairs, and in fact at that first rehearsal we pretty much broke the back of Roundabout and Heart of the Sunrise. And I thought, this is just great. Steve Howe said to me, look, I don't drive. You live in Harrow, don't you? I said, yeah. He said, I'm in Hampstead. Couldn't drop us off on the way home, could you? And I said, yeah, of course I will. I said, I'll drop you off because I said, I've got to actually go to Hampstead because David Bowie wants to have a meeting with me tomorrow, wants to have a drink with me. I said, okay. So I dropped Steve off, and then I went off to meet David Bowie, who was with Mick Ronson, the Hampstead Country Club. And he sat down, and David, and David just said, look, I'm forming a band called Spiders from Mars. He said, I'd like you and Mick to run it. How do you feel about that? And I said, oh, it was a strange day. I was asked to join yesterday. Now, Spiders from Mars didn't exist, and David hadn't been on the road, and Yes hadn't broken big in English. So, I mean, looking back, it was a sort of a monumental day, but it wasn't at the, if you know what I mean. And I went, oh, crikey. He said, well, when you made a decision, just give it. I said, right. So I went home, and I thought all about it over the next day, actually, the next day. And I came to the conclusion, I absolutely love working with David Bowie, and it's the best person I've ever worked with in the studio. It was absolutely fantastic. And I thought, truth of the matter is, yeah, I could see Spiders from Mars being great for a period of time because David likes to change musicians and likes to change direction. But at the end of the day, there would only be so far I could go musically because you'd always be doing David's songs. As much as I love them, there would be a limit of your input of what you could do. Whereas, yes, with it developing, there's going to be input in the music and the arrangements in the direction and all that. So I chose Yes, and I told David, and I never think he just said, you've made absolutely the right decision. He said, you have made the right decision. And we talked about it. We became neighbours in Switzerland in the late 70s, and we used to meet up quite a lot, you know, and by that time he'd moved on to the next band and the next things that had happened. So, you know, I'm glad I did that decision, but when I look back, it was, I suppose, the equivalent of being asked, do you want to play for Chelsea or Man United or something, really. But it was so.
What's your favourite period of Yes?
My favourite period of Yes, I've got two favourite periods of Yes, and I'll tell you for why. On the performance side of Yes, my favourite period is 2002 to 2005. Okay. We only played what I call the classic stuff on during that touring period. But it was one of those unique times when, performance-wise, everybody in their own way had peaked with the way they played Yes music. And so it was a bit like a football team where the players are all sort of matured at the same time for what they do. And I can remember in 2004 we were playing on the top, and I remember being on stage going, you know what, we couldn't play any of this any better if we carried on playing for the rest of our lives. It was absolutely astonishing. It was the strength of Five became a lot more because, as I say, we'd all really peaked and understood. Plus, of course, especially for me, the technological advantages and advances as well in keyboards meant that I could do so much more that was frustratingly you couldn't do performing live in the 70s. Having said that, everything was always played. We had nothing on disc, nothing sampled. It was always played. So that period of playing is, for me, the best. Music-wise, I enjoyed, obviously, the early 70s with Fragile and Close to the Edge. They were real pioneering days, and they were really great albums to do. But for what I call the pinnacle of what prog rock was back then, you have to move to 1976 to the Going for the One album, which we recorded in Switzerland, and the track Awaken, which if anybody ever asked me, what is prog rock? I say, well, okay, it's got so many different genres now. I mean, you've got everything from sort of Dream Theater to Muse to, you know, to Mars Volta. There's just so many different kinds of prog rock now. But back then, if you wanted to know what I think the epitome of 70s prog rock is, I say, you know, play Awaken from the Going for the One album, because it contained all of the ingredients without going over the top. It was after that things started to go really over the top.
McCormick, and you're watching Needle Time with my guest Rick Wakeman. So you went in and out of yes, and in and out of yes.
Yep.
So yes and no, yes and no. And in the meantime, you became this incredibly individual. There's nobody else like you in music. I think it's fair to say solo rock, keyboard, elaborate one-man performer, you know, with these solo albums. These hugely ambitious solo albums. The first one was Journey to the...
First one was Six Wives, Henry VIII.
Oh, Six Wives, Henry VIII,
Yeah,
yes.
that
And there
was
was
the
Journey
first
to
one.
Center of the Earth, and there was the Myths of King Arthur and his
Yeah.
Knights of the Round Table. What did you think? Did you think you wanted to write the equivalent of classical formed music? And what was
No,
that?
I mean, the truth is, it's all accident. Nearly everything that happens is a sort of accident, or you know, when what was the lovely expression, when preparation meets opportunity, or opportunity meets preparation, whichever you like, which way around you want to put it. One of the things that had happened a lot in the 70s, and record companies just started to get cute, happened in the 60s, was that bands would form, get a huge advance for a record label, make one album, break up, and then go and do another deal somewhere else as individuals and as other bands. And it was costing record companies a lot of money. So the way they got round it was that when they signed a band, they would sign all of the musicians in the band individually. Not to guarantee to do anything, but to have an option that if they wanted to, they could take it. And I joined Yes, went off in 1971 to tour America with them. And my manager, Brian Lane, who's still my manager now, said to me, Jerry Moss, head of A&M Records, wants to see you. And I said, we were in Los Angeles, and I said, why? He said, I'm not really sure. I said, but I'll come with you. So we went down to A&M Records, which was a fantastic place. It was Charlie Chaplin's old film lot. Brilliant place. And I went there and I went in, met Jerry Moss, and he said, you know you're signed to us? And I said, yeah, I think you've got an option, yeah, because of Straws. He said, well, we want to take that option up. We want you to do an album for us. And I said, oh, I'd love to. And... I mean, it was $12,500, which was about £4,000 back then. So I wasn't going to get much done for that. So he said, do you know what you want to do? I said, well, no, because this is all news to me in every respect. So I had the rest of the tour to think about it. And I bought a book at an airport, I think it was Richmond, Virginia Airport, which was called The Private Life of Henry VIII. And I started reading it, and I got to a bit all about Anne Boleyn, and it was very weird, because as I'm reading it, I could hear there was a certain melody in my head that came through. I thought, that's interesting, and I remember getting out a piece of paper, drawing some staves on it, and just writing the theme that had come down. And as I carried on reading the book, I thought, this could be a really nice subject to write about, because it's obviously going to be an instrumental keyboard album. And that's basically what I did. A&M didn't like it, actually, when I first did. I finished recording it, and I had to go along to A&M in London. They were in St George Street above Steinway Pianos. And one of the bosses, not Jerry Moss, but one of the bosses, one of the lawyers, had flown in from America to hear it. And I went into the managing director's room. I got my quarter-inch tapes and put it on. They're sitting there, and then plus the guy from America. And I played the first side. And you know when things are going well and they're not going well. And it was just the look of total and utter bewilderment on their face that this ain't going well. And when it came to the end of the first tape of the first three, there wasn't a word spoken. So I got up, put the second reel on, went over to the cocktail cabinet, got out a bottle of scotch, and proceeded while it was playing to drink most of it. I thought, this is... And at the end of it, the guy from America, he said, "Yeah, that's really interesting, Rick. Very interesting." He said, "I look forward to hearing it when the vocals are on." And I said, "There aren't any vocals." He said, "No." I said, "No, it's an instrumental album." And I can tell you what he exactly said, but you'll probably have to bleep the word out. He said, he turned to the MD, he said, "You mean we've paid $12,500 for a piano player?" And the MD said, "Yeah, but he's quite a good piano player." And he went, "How the fuck are we going to sell? How many do we have to sell to break even?" Now, I'm sitting there while this is going on, so I'm just pouring out more. He said, "Well, probably about 12 to 15,000 copies." He said, "Are we going to do that?" He said, "Well, I don't know." He went, "Oh, God." It sold 14 million in the end. Right. But it was really quite funny. And they put it out, and it did pretty well everywhere it went.
Do you have a favourite? What is the definitive, the greatest Rick Wig?
Oh, crikey. That's really
You love
tough.
them all.
Well, no, I don't. I'll be honest with you, I don't. I mean, because retrospect is the only way that you can look back on things. At the time, you always think you're doing your best, whatever it is. But I think you have to wait 20 years to look back. And also you have to look at it at that period of time as well. And you look back and go, you know what, I'm really proud of that. But there's somebody you look back and go, no, that really... But at the time you thought it was the right thing. So no, I don't like all of them. But you learn from all of them.
What do you enjoy? Which ones do you enjoy going out and playing?
The definitive would be the final version of Journey to the Centre of the Earth, which was released this year on ADA, which is the full version with all the missing music in. That is something I'm particularly proud of. The trouble is, there isn't anything that I would definitively turn around and say that is the pinnacle or the epitome of what I do. I mean, that can really only be decided as they're nailing the last nail in the coffin.
I remember the early days of the synths when you used to have to plug everything in. You'd be there.
God, it was a nightmare.
Plugs going around here into these huge things, and now they're like this.
Yeah.
And they've got just enough keys to make some notes. Do you keep up with all the new keyboard technology?
Yeah, we've got a real mix. I mean, my rig on stage, I think there's, including rack mounts, I think there's 28 keyboards in my rig. Some of them date back to the early 70s, and some literally are prototypes that aren't even in the in the music stores yet. The great thing, I would like to be younger, but I'd like to be younger having lived through the period of time that I lived through, because it was the wonderful pioneering time of music. And you're dead right, keyboards, you had to make sounds. I remember talking to Keith Emerson and to John Lord about things. I got something. You spend weeks going, finally get a sound. You go, I like that, and that became yours because you'd spent weeks trying to get it. Nowadays, of course, any keyboard you get, they've got thousands of different presets and things like that. And the difference there is, of course, everybody's got those thousands of different presets. First thing I do with any keyboard when I get it is to wipe the internal sounds off and put my own in. Because that's the only way you can be in individual in any way. So yeah, we do keep it intact.
And what is then the ultimate keyboard? Is it still the piano?
Yeah. If I have the famous desert island question, what instrument do you take? It would be a piano. Yeah, absolutely every time. As regards keyboards, they're developing all the time. If there is one keyboard that changed the face for keyboard players of music, it would be the Moog, Bob Moog, and possibly the Mini Moog, because in spite of all technological advances, no one has come even close to doing what the Mini Moog does. I think it was the instrument that changed the face for keyboard players.
Mm. I've now got a picture of you on a desert island playing a piano. And the other great thing of that is, you could chop it up, make it a boat and float off.
Yeah, that's very true. You could keep the shell and still play, and then float off. The piano. I never tire of sitting at the piano. I will never tire of sitting at the piano. It is a remarkable instrument because all the electronic keyboards, the one thing that they haven't got is that extension of you feel the sound coming through your fingers when you depress. Because it's mechanical, when you depress the key on a piano, you can feel what's happening before, on how you caress it, play or whatever, on how that hammer strikes the string. And there isn't another instrument, a keyboard instrument, that can do that for you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rick.
Thanks,
Rick Wakeman, for coming and telling us why we should be listening to prog rock. I'm going to have to go back.
And there'll be somebody at home going, no.
When I was at home, stuck at the old sink, I used to dream about going out to work again and all the different jobs I could do. But when the time came and I did get the chance, I didn't know how to start or where to go. Then one day, on my way to the shops, I was given a government leaflet. It told me all about getting a job again, and the tax, and about training for things. All of which proved so interesting to my neighbours and friends that I shall now have to get another one from my local employment exchange.